Well, and I felt that was part of what attracted me to chaplaincy was that getting to work with people who believe different things and learning about them and why you believe those things. And I felt very strongly about our First Amendment rights to practice our own traditions. Army's got some boundaries that we have to follow, but within those boundaries, I wanted to make sure that those soldiers felt that they had the space to practice their spiritual life as they could.
You're listening to the Real Estate Sessions podcast, and I'm your host, Bill Risser, Executive Vice President, Strategic Partnerships with Rate My Agent, a digital marketing platform designed to help great agents harness the power of verified reviews. For more information, head on over to ratemyagent.com. Listen in as I interview industry leaders and get their stories and journeys to the world of real estate. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 364 of the Real Estate Sessions podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for telling a friend. Today, we're going to head to the West Texas town of El Paso. You're going to hear that mentioned a couple times in the show. But we're going to be talking to Brian Hall. Brian Hall is with EXP Realty. His team name is the Service First Team. He works a lot with Fort Bliss people coming in and out, the PCS portion of their career where they're being transferred. And I'm really excited to talk to Brian about his career in the Army. It's a little different. It's going to be a path that I've never had a conversation with someone who took this path before. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Let's get this thing started. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it and appreciate those kind words.
Yeah, well, look, we're going to have a lot of fun today. I mentioned we met through Rate My Agent, which you're a user of ours, and we're very excited to. We'll chat a little bit about that later.
Okay.
But first of all, like all my episodes, I want to find out about you. We're going to get to the real estate stuff shortly, but let's first of all, you're in El Paso, and I know that because you do very well in the Rate My Agent Awards in El Paso. Are you a native Texan? Did you grow up, in the largest state in the country?
I guess it a little bit depends on your definition of native. My dad was actually in the Air Force,
okay.
And I was actually born in Riverside, California.
Okay.
But I don't ever remember growing up outside of Texas.
Okay.
So he moved. My brother was born in Great Falls, Montana, and then we moved to Abilene, Texas, my mom's hometown. I think I was 2. But graduated from high school in Abilene, Texas. I went to college at TCU after that, and then worked for a few years after college in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Okay.
So I basically consider myself a Texan.
Yeah, I think you have the right. That's pretty good. Yeah, there's others that it's kind of off. It's a little bit off when they're saying they're a Texan. Like, well, you got that when you were 22, and I know you're 40, but that doesn't count.
We welcome other people from other states. I mean, and being in the real estate industry, I see that they come in, and so we're definitely, but we're definitely proud to be Texans.
Yeah. Give me the biggest misconception about Texas for those outside of Texas.
Well, kind of the lighthearted response is that we do not ride horses to work everywhere in Texas.
Yeah.
So nor do we wear cowboy hats all of the time. So I do own a pair of boots, and I do wear those occasionally, but that's kind of the lighthearted response. I do think, though, one of the major misconceptions is people just don't understand how big geographically Texas is. I'll see especially with my work with the military, people they get stationed in, El Paso, Texas, and think, my cousin lives in Austin. I'll just run over and see them. That is a 9-hour drive from El Paso, relatively at the speed limit. My dad's family is in Houston, Texas. We made the trek one time from El Paso to Houston. We did that in 2 days just because I had little kids. It's roughly 13 hours of driving. And so it's a big state with a lot of space between the major cities.
Yeah. Texas is filled with sports teams. So I need some answers from you. You can go whichever way you want with this stuff. Either is it Cowboys or Texans? Is it Rangers or Astros? Is it, how about Mavs or Rockets? Where are we at, Brian?
Well, I'm a little bit of a house divided, honestly. I grew up a Cowboys fan, and then could say I broke up with the Cowboys when Jerry Jones bought the team because I did not like the way he handled the firing of Tom Landry, and my middle school head of everyone should be treated honestly and fairly all the time, and live on your pedigree somewhat. And then I became an Oilers fan after that because my dad's family was in Houston. So, I got to watch all the Cowboys enjoy their Super Bowls of the 90s. But now I've married into a Cowboys family. My wife's family is from Dallas. She has raised my boys, you might say, to be Cowboys fans. So we're definitely Cowboys fans in this house now, especially since the Oilers no longer exist in that form.
Right.
But huge Rangers fan growing up. Since having kids, just haven't had the time to follow them as I used to. I was also a Rockets fan for a long time, but again, just my wife's is a huge. They're all Dallas sports fans, so Stars fans as well. So we're mostly the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex sports fans. You should say. So.
That's fair. That's fair. You actually attended university in that part of the country, Fort Worth, I think, right? Is where TCU's located.
Correct. Yes.
So
yes.
What was your plan? What was your field of study? What were you going to be doing after school? I'm just assuming real estate wasn't even a blip on the radar.
No, it was not.
Okay. And then I do want to know what a horned frog is too. You have to answer that question.
Okay. So that's a multi-part question.
Yes.
There,
yes. I'll leave it to you.
The short. I'll start with the last question first. A horned frog, also known as a horned toad or a horned lizard. I mean, it's a specific species of lizard that's kind of native to the Southwest desert climates. I remember seeing them a lot when I was a kid. I grew up in Abilene, Texas, so about 150 miles west of TCU down the interstate. Saw a lot of horned frogs horned toads, I think as we called them then, growing up. And then, so I went to graduate high school. I was kind of a math science guy in high school. Said, Brian, you should be an engineer. That lasted about 3 semesters, and it was just not exciting enough for me. But I couldn't, like a lot of kids that age, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I'd already planned to take a lot of math classes as an engineer. So I just ended up getting a math degree. However, I also minored in computer science. And this was right late 90s, .com bubble was happening. And so, computer jobs were quite prevalent. I did work for an insurance company for about 6 months after college. Again, didn't really enjoy that. And then ended up coming with one of my classmates from TCU, worked with her doing IT work at a publishing company there in Fort Worth. And I was there that was the first, I would say, my first career before the Army.
I'd love to see how the Army comes into play, because here we are, you're probably, I'm going to guess you're in your late 20s. And and I would think most recruits.
Yeah, around 30.
Okay.
Around 30.
Around 30. Okay. So most recruits into the Army are, I would guess, a little bit younger than that.
Absolutely. I was working for this company. I loved the people I worked with. We were owned by a much larger corporation, and they were just making some changes as larger corporations do to try to make more efficiencies. And I could just see kind of the writing on the wall. Anyway, so it was just, the culture was changing, and I was in probably spot in my life. I was single, looking for something a little more meaningful, you might say. This was, kind of put in history. This is the global war on terror. 9/11 had happened. This was the early, probably mid to late aughts, around 2007. So the war was hot and heavy in Iraq and Afghanistan at that point. And I just, I had some buddies who, we all kind of, when 9/11 happened, really, as just about everybody in the whole country, really sent some shockwaves, and then really did some soul searching about what's important. And I had never really acted on that, but kind of reaching a point in my life where I reconnected with a friend of mine from TCU who was in ministry, and we just got to be, really close friends. And I kind of, was a little bit of envying of her job of being in ministry, working with spiritual ideas, something more meaningful than, helping a corporation increase their bottom line.
Right.
And so anyway, so that was kind of, I did some soul searching, for lack of a better term. And she really challenged me to really as a person of faith, as I was raised in church, really just, she's like, I know you'd say you're doing good things. I mean, it's not like I was doing criminal activity, of course, or anything like that,
right.
But it was, what is it, what's meaningful, and what should you be doing? I spent a day in the park, just really praying and meditating about what is right for me right now, career wise. And, the answer I got was that not this, but I didn't know what exactly was next. And then it was a couple of days later, I heard a talk by a retired chaplain from my church. And he was talking not specifically about the chaplaincy, but he did relate some stories of when he had been deployed to Panama back in the early 80s, and just in those harshest of moments, still finding spirituality and being able to share that with his soldiers and help them find meaning and in the Christian definition of salvation as well. And so that just really spoke to me at that. And like I said, so then I went back, single guy, went back, talked to mom. Mom was the spiritual sort of head of my family. And she's like, Brian, if this is something that you're considering, the church has reopened the chaplain training program. And if you are considering something like this is the time in your life to do it. You don't have any immediate family ties and so it was pretty much right then I made that decision to quit my corporate job, sold my house, and then the church did require, or actually the Department of Defense requires a master's degree to be a chaplain. And so I had to I didn't have that master's degree. So that was my first step, was to go to school for 3 years, get a full time up in Boston, Massachusetts. My church is headquartered in Boston. So in addition to the academic training, they provided some auxiliary chaplain training at the church itself.
And then how long were you active?
I was active for about 7-ish years,
okay.
A little over 7. So I left active duty in the summer. My final out date was like the end of September of 2018.
Okay.
I then moved over. I transitioned over the reserves because I did enjoy serving. I did like my job. Mm-hmm. And I drilled for about almost 2 years in the reserves. And then real estate, unfortunately or fortunately, got too busy.
Right.
And we know a lot of real estate happens on the weekends. So it's really hard as you're to say one weekend of a month, I'm not available kind of thing. And and then there's definitely a little bit of it was, for me personally, it was a split mindset of, trying to be this spiritual leader, what the unit needed, and then doing also real estate as well. So the bottom line is I couldn't give the reserves what it needed at that point. I didn't feel like I was honoring the job. And so instead of getting all the way out of the reserves, I moved over into inactive state, or the IRR, as we call it. Okay. So technically, I'm administratively still in, but there's nothing, I'm not doing anything. So there's the potential that I could be recalled if the country needs me. And that's part of why, the U.S. gets invaded, they could call me up and, I could go off and be a chaplain again for the Army if they need me.
My guess is you're still in your role as a realtor, especially with all the stuff you do with Fort Bliss and all that other stuff. You're still helping out quite a bit with all of that training you received.
Yeah, I had some clients that my wife and I work together as a team on our real estate business. And so there's many times where husband and wife client get to know us as husband and wife in addition to just realtor. And so there was this particular couple I felt like we'd gotten to be friends with, and we've seen each other socially since they bought their house here, but they were building a house and having some really major frustrations with the builder. And so we had a call, myself and the husband and wife client. The wife is an Army psychiatrist. And anyway, so they were just kind of just venting, for lack of a better term, like all of the challenges they're having with this builder. And I just, and I sat there and listened. And then the husband, and like, as we wrapping up the conversation, and the husband was like, Brian, have you ever considered a career in the mental health field? You're such a good listener. And I was like, Joey, do you remember? Like, I'm an Army chaplain. He's like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. So there are times where I do get to use those skills.
That's awesome. I have to be honest, I'm in my 60s. I've never talked to a chaplain before. I want to ask a couple of questions just about that side of your life. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. And this is the, I just think of MASH when I think of a chaplain, because there was, right. I mean, and that's in a really tough situation, deployed in we're at war in that movie or that series. But for you, talk a little bit about you. I'm sure you were deployed overseas. You had units that you had to help, and you help. Right. I imagine you help in a lot of different ways. One of them you said is listening, right? But there've got to be some other things that you're really structured to help those soldiers with.
Yeah. So one of our kind of main sort of shorthand guiding principles as a chaplain is to perform or provide. So my job is for my Christian soldiers, especially the Protestants, like I could perform worship, rites, etc. for them. I'm not Catholic. I'm not a Catholic priest. So because of the way that faith works traditionally, like I can't perform their sacraments, for
Okay.
them, their Eucharist. And so what I did when we were deployed, we went to Turkey for about a year, right when the Syrian civil war kicked off over there. I was with a Patriot missile battalion, and we were sent over there to basically play defense. And so fortunately, we were close enough to a regular U.S. Air Force installation over in Incirlik, Turkey, and they had a Catholic priest over there who was a chaplain. So again, my job was then, and I made arrangements for him to come over about once a month to do Catholic worship for my Catholic soldiers. And then that particular unit, I also had a Buddhist soldier. So meditation is very important to that tradition. And so one of the perks about being a chaplain is you typically always have your own office space because we need to have confidential space to have counseling in.
Right.
And so I had an office, and I made that office available to him so he could have that private time to meditate when he needed to. So that was my way of providing a space for him as well. So, and then the other thing that I always really try to do, especially on deployment, was the American holiday of Thanksgiving is important because gratitude and expressions of gratitude are fairly universal across the traditions.
Right.
And so that particular deployment, I also had a Muslim soldier. And so we had Christian, Muslim, and Buddhism represented in that. And I did a gratitude Thanksgiving service. And I always tried to do that when I was deployed to, again, I found the expressions of gratitude was always a way to uplift and kind of move from as we say in the Army, the suck that's going on.
Yeah.
We're away from our families, eating food that we would rather not be eating, and let's find something that we can be grateful for.
Wow, I love your use of the word traditions. I think that's fantastic. So just a different way of looking at everyone has comes from a different place, right? Yeah.
Well, and I thought that was part of what attracted me to the chaplaincy was that getting to work with people who believe different things and learning about them and why you believe those things. And, and I felt very strongly about our First Amendment rights to practice our own traditions. Army's got some boundaries that we have to follow, but within those boundaries, I wanted to make sure that those soldiers felt that they had the space to practice their spiritual life as they could.
Yeah. Well, as I said a little bit earlier, I think those skills you picked up, in your time in the Army absolutely dovetails directly into the world of real estate. I mean, you're constantly, you're helping people, you're teaching them, you're solving problems for them, you're consoling them. There's lots of things I feel that work very well for you.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and
thank you. Yeah, especially the last couple of years of the COVID market, we definitely had some counseling that we, consoling for, especially for buyers who were losing out on multiple offers all the time. Yeah, we definitely had some challenges we had to work through.
Right. So, active duty, you were stationed at Fort Bliss. I'm just guessing that's what got you to El Paso. So.
Correct.
But when you went reserve, you could have lived anywhere, right? You didn't have to choose El Paso.
But yeah, so why El Paso? I think a lot of it has to do with the impression El Paso made on my family when we came into El Paso. This was pre-COVID, so we had a chance to come down, and we're coming from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So we're close enough that we could came down over spring break to report in July to just kind of look around and figure out, this West Texas town of El Paso, as Marty Robbins likes to call it. So it was, yeah. And so when we got here, my middle son, who is now 8, was 4 months old. Wow. And so he was this blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid, baby, and just we went to the restaurants, the waitresses were just kind of gaga over him and just really warm to us as a family. And then there's a vineyard not too far. It's actually just across the state line in New Mexico. My wife and I were there, just listening to some music, just kind of chatted up somebody next to us and told them we're with the Army coming to El Paso. Next thing you know, they bought us a bottle of wine, said, "Welcome to El Paso. We're glad you're here." And so that sort of welcoming has just kind of kept on. That was one of the reasons that we decided to stay. We also, when we came in, we bought a house with the idea what a lot of military do, they'll buy a house and then they rent it out kind of as investment for later on during retirement. But so we already owned our house. And then the other thing that really kind of, I think, was a factor was the school systems. We're in, so there's four major school districts. There's several other ancillary school districts around and in El Paso city limits. The district where all these four major districts, they provide dual language education free of charge. And so my son, who's now in sixth grade, has had Spanish, half the day in Spanish every day.
Wow.
For his whole career.
That's awesome.
And so, yep. And so I've got three boys, sixth grader, third grader, first grader, and they've all been in the dual language program. And it's just been, it's awesome. My sixth grader basically functions as our translator when we need it. Went to one of our favorite restaurants. They'd swapped out the wait staff, and I think they'd moved all of their English speakers to their new location. And so we were a little stuck, but my sixth grader, I think he was fifth grade at that point, just without missing a beat, able to order all our food, ask for the kids stuff to come out early, which is our normal way to get the kids happy. And so and it was without missing a beat in Spanish, all of that. And so and my wife and I just looked at each other like, we're just really grateful for that free education, that free aspect of the education that we're getting here.
Yeah.
So those are our big reasons.
I'll wrap up this portion of the episode with, I want to talk a little bit about the PCS Pay It Forward program. It's something that you're involved in. I would imagine as a realtor next to an Army base, you're definitely, you're the one, regardless of what sort of certification you get from NAR or whatever. When you've lived it, it's a lot different than just taking a class, right?
It definitely so. Yeah. So PCS Pay It Forward is an organization was started by Lauren Taylor, military spouse out in San Diego. And then this was her brainchild. And it's really, the medium that she chose was Facebook to kind of reach service members. But it's got three main goals. At least in the Army, they have what's called the sponsor program. It's supposed to like, hey, I'm coming to your unit. Okay, we assign you someone of equivalent rank to kind of help you with that transition to get from your current duty station to your new one, which is us. And you can imagine if you assign that to a single 22-year-old, how much really help are you going to get? And no offense to single 22-year-olds, I was one at one point. I think I've joked about this with the Pay It Forward group, that if that program was really doing its real job, we wouldn't be necessary. But it's a challenge just because, everyone's got their own day job in the military,
right,
besides trying to help this person I've never met before kind of thing. And so that's our goal, is to provide this smooth transition, to get you into a home, whether it's living on post, renting off post, or buying a house, in the local community. That's the goal, is to get you into a house and then kind of ancillary to that is to then eliminate the need for any kind of temporary housing as much as possible.
Gotcha.
I mean, we during COVID, when builders were getting delayed all the time, it was kind of hard to avoid that. And so we had a lot of people staying in Airbnbs, but as much as we can to start that process sooner rather than later. I just closed with some clients, a couple of weeks ago. They had an Airbnb for about a week, and that's actually not typical for my buyers. Usually we have them start soon enough so that they can either show up and close or close before they even get here kind of thing. And they're ready to just move right in. Same thing with our renters. Try to get them plugged into the local property managers and get them video tours and hopefully signing a lease before they spend a long time, here in El Paso looking for that.
Right.
And then the third goal that we have is to, to educate and potential renters to avoid rental scams. And there was an article a couple years ago, how many thousands of dollars have been scammed out of service members for sending the deposits, and then find out that whoever they sent that money to has nothing to do with that property and able to rent it. And so we really try to use verified rental listings. Fortunately, El Paso, there's a lot of listings in the multiple listing service for rentals, the MLS. I know there are some military installations, those local MLSs don't have many at all. At least in El Paso, we have that. So those are listings. You have to be a member of the association through a brokerage. So those are going to be legitimate listings.
Right.
And then, people will send me stuff on Zillow and it's like for rent by owner. And I'm like, proceed with caution,
Yeah.
these are some questions that you need to ask and make sure. But, so I always try as best as I can to help those potential renters as well, get them those verified rental listings, and then try to put them in contact with the actual listing agents to get those leases signed for those.
I was going to say that's good knowledge for everyone in the country who's an agent. I mean, that's just,
Absolutely.
I mean, we all have to, you have to be watching.
Yeah.
So Brian, you get to real estate around 2018, roughly 2019, and you start with Century 21, but just a couple of years ago, you make the switch over to EXP.
I did.
Yeah. And what was the rationale there for that move?
Sure. So my business coach had been with EXP and just kind of, very gently recruiting me over that time period. But I was very happy at Century 21. My first broker, and I look back, like that is where I needed to start my real estate career. That's because he gave me what I needed to begin my career. I'm definitely a rule follower and like to understand the why behind things. And he was very good about educating us on just being good with understanding contracts, understanding laws and rules and things like that, just to keep us out of trouble.
Yeah.
And I still see him around the association and still actually refer him for people who want to rent their houses out to go rent them out through that office. And so, but I felt that I would get more as far as team building. I have a small team, as well as just the higher level training that's available through EXP. Being a national company, you just have the access to a lot of high level realtors that are doing big things if that's what you want to do. And so that was just, like I said, she had been just kind of gently presenting that, and kind of then at one point basically kind of gave me an offer I couldn't refuse to help me. And so that was when I pulled the trigger finally. And it was a happy and a sad day, honestly. My oldest son actually cried when I told him I was leaving Century 21, which shocked me and Elizabeth, my wife, that he had that much attachment to that office. I mean, Elizabeth and I also shed some tears as well, because like I said, we really liked being there, but it was what we needed to do.
Yeah.
So anyways, it was like I said, it was a happy and a sad transition, but one that I've definitely appreciated and enjoyed.
I would imagine that because El Paso is much bigger than I thought. What's the population of El Paso, rough? I think you had
somewhere like 700,000 plus or minus.
Big. It's a big city.
Check again. Yeah. It is a big city.
It's not the town that Marty Robbins.
It's not a little West Texas town, El Paso.
Okay.
Kind of thing anymore.
So your breakdown of your work, right? If I was to look at your transactions in a given year, what percentage of it is helping inbound and outbound PCS, military taking care of things, versus your local community where, we all know real estate's local?
It's definitely lopsided. I'd say 90-95% of my stuff is military.
Okay.
And then, which is good, because being kind of a transplant into the city, I didn't have much of a sphere of influence as we talk about in the real estate industry,
Right.
So I do, it's not like I'm not going to help my civilian friends from El Paso. Just that net does not pull back much, but that net is getting wider as we spend more time here.
Right. As the kids get older and you meet more people, I mean, that's all part of it.
We're involved in more organizations. So we were at a daycare here for 7 years, and, I was on that board, and, this is not why I was on the board, but just as real estate goes, I was able to do a couple of transactions through those contacts that I met there. And so, absolutely, it helped the civilian population. But my bread and butter is military and VA buyers. So,
gotcha. And I would imagine even in that space, it's heavily referral relationship based. Is that true?
I do. Yeah. So one of the neat things about the PCS Pay It Forward organization is our title is ambassador. And so there's an ambassador for each just about every DoD installation. There's some smaller ones, either Air Force or Coast Guard, some that don't necessarily have a full-time ambassador. But definitely, I have a lot of traffic going between Fort Hood, which is now Fort Cavalos. It's been renamed after many years, which is hard for us in the Army to make that name change.
Sure.
But so as an example, or Fort Bragg, which is now Fort Liberty. There's a lot of traffic between Fort Bliss and there. So yeah, so we do have that network that established for easy. Hey, I know somebody. Like I've physically shaken their hands, and
Right.
we've sat in a room and brainstormed ideas together, and we see each other every week on a Zoom call, kind of thing. So it is nice to have that built-in network to be able to refer people back and forth.
And we got to talk a little bit about Rate My Agent, because you
Sure.
do very well with your review strategy. I mean, you rank very high in Rate My Agent in EXP in Texas. You dominate El Paso. So you're using, talk about how you're using that tool, because I think you're reaffirming it into that your core group. How valuable you can be, what sort of experience you can provide, right?
So yeah, so I mean, it's definitely standard practice that once a transaction is closed, depending on the timing. So I have buyers, I just had some buyers. They closed early July. They were coming from Germany, but because they were in Germany for so long, they hadn't been to the U.S. to see their family. So they were going to get back to the U.S. and then take like 30 days of leave to go see their family and then come to El Paso. So they didn't actually get to their house until the first week of September. I find it awkward to request a review. How did I do helping you buy your new house when you haven't even seen said house yet?
That's a good call.
So we try to, so I know Rate My Agent has a feature to automatically request that review when you close it out, at least in EXP using our compliance system, SkySlope. I don't have that feature turned on for that reason. So it's a bit more manual. I have some international assistants that will help kind of when the time is right, send that review request. But everyone gets a review just about. There's been some, maybe one or just, we landed, but it was a very rough landing, to use the airplane metaphor there.
Sure.
And so it maybe, it didn't make sense to, how did I do, kind of thing. And but I even had some rough transactions where I was shocked of how nicely they spoke of me, honestly, because in my head, I mean, like, it wasn't my fault. There was, I had a buyer one time that they discovered mold when they moved in.
Okay.
That was not disclosed. And they were obviously upset. And they were, however, able to delineate between my performance and the seller's, indiscretion there, which I definitely appreciated.
Yeah.
And then reading that review, knowing the emotional turmoil just made it even that much more meaningful to me, that they could have trashed me there for not, finding, not doing everything I could have to find this problem beforehand, kind of thing. And so I definitely appreciated that. That's one of the reviews that kind of stick out in my head as one of my favorites.
That's awesome.
So everyone gets a review, and we have the automated follow-up. We almost always try to email and text them to remind them of that. And then depending on, if we're not getting a response, we do a lot of communication with our clients through Facebook Messenger, just because that's where a lot of the leads originate, is through Facebook. And so we may follow up, hey, just a friendly reminder if you could, kind of thing. Try to get that review where we can.
Nice. You're very techie, so that helps a lot, I think, with a lot of the stuff you're doing. And I'm always curious when I talk to someone who's tech savvy, and it doesn't have to be an extravagantly long list, but what does your tech stack look like? Yeah, your CRM, know with EXP, maybe you're using their tools. Some people do, some people don't. I'm curious.
So for my CRM, I use Follow Up Boss.
Okay.
That's my primary one. However, I still kind of use KV Core, which is provided through EXP. For one of the reasons it has a natural IDX integration at KV Core, which Follow Up Boss does not. And so, but I have, then on the back end, I have Zapier linking them to. So if someone comes in through KV Core, they get dumped over to Follow Up Boss automatically.
Nice.
And so then I also do a little bit of Constant Contact for like my, email marketing. I have a TC that they use A-Frame for their transaction management system, which then I have access to that when I need it. And so those are my big ones. I also have, again, I have an app, a real estate app provided by Homestack, So it's like the service first. My team is named the service first team, and so we have an actual like you can go to the Google Play Store or the iTunes or the Apple App Store and download the service first team app, which then basically the goal is to keep them in that environment and not go off looking at those other websites and click the wrong thing and some other agent contacts them to kind of help them out, kind of thing. So,
yeah, it's a full IDX solution. It's got everything in there. They can search for everything,
Yep.
save stuff. You can see what they're doing. Yep. It's pretty cool. Yeah, homestead.
Yeah, it is.
I love that. Yeah. Brian, I've taken more of your time than I was supposed to, so I'm going to wrap this up with the final question that I've asked to every guest. What one piece of advice would you give a new agent just getting started?
Find a mentor and a coach that will open their playbook to you. Sometimes, and that's what my coach did, is open her playbook, and really, it literally changed my life. And so find those successful people who, will it cost you? Yes. But then you got to go do the work that they tell you to do. And so that would be my number one piece of advice.
Awesome. Brian, if somebody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I mean, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram as well. There's a lot of Brian Halls out there, but I'm the one in El Paso, Texas.
All right.
So yeah, that's definitely, hit me up on Facebook Messenger or come by the business page, Service First Team. I feel like I'm pretty easy to find on the socials. So,
well, I'll get those links from you and I'll put them in the show notes. So everybody listening can just quickly click on those links down below. Brian, this has been fantastic. Thank you for your time today. Obviously, I'm going to be remiss if I don't say this. Thank you so much for your service. I think that specific department of the armed forces is not highlighted very much, and I'm glad we had a little opportunity to chat about that today and help let a few more people know about how important that role
was. I mean, honestly, even growing up in my church and I grew up near Dyess Air Force Base. I didn't know there was such things as military chaplains until not too long before I decided to be one.
Wow.
So it's not something that you hear about a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your time, and we'll chat soon. I'm sure I'll see you maybe in October of 2023. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, I'll swing by the booth again.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
All right. Take care, Bill.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Sessions. Please head over to ratethispodcast.com/RE sessions to leave a review or a rating, and subscribe to the Real Estate Sessions podcast at your favorite podcast listening app.